so that you don't have to worry about taking a whole bunch of notes. The recording will be available to you on the web. Additionally, you can answer questions either via the chat box or the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. We will be not answering questions during the webinar, just so we can get through our content. But at the end, there will be some designated time to take all of your questions that you've asked throughout. Feel free to, again, chat throughout, or to ask specific questions at that point. If you have anything else, I just want to make sure, do one more quick check, make sure everyone can hear. So if you can type in either the chat box or the question box that you can hear, that you can see the screen that says individual prospecting with Donorly, that confirms that we can do what we need to do. And then without further ado, I'm ready to get started. I will introduce, this is again Emily Komisar from Donorly.
Hi, Courtney. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for calling in on a Tuesday evening. I know that talking about individual fundraising can be a little bit daunting and overwhelming, and I appreciate you spending your evening with me. So we'll just sort of dive right in. This is an overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. I want to start by giving you a brief introduction to the concept of individual donor prospecting, for those of you who are maybe a little bit less familiar with the process. And then we'll go through sort of your three main steps for what this kind of fundraising looks like. We'll talk about identifying your prospects, your prospective donors. We'll talk about making the ask for real money. And then we'll talk about stewardship. And as Courtney said at the end, we will take time for questions. So first, I just want to give you a little bit of background about the organization I work for, Donorly. Donorly is a New York City-based consulting firm with the mission of empowering nonprofits to fundraise beyond their size. We believe that every nonprofit has its own unique personality and culture, and we collaborate with all of our partner organizations to find organic, elegant, and efficient solutions that serve their missions while expanding their fundraising capacity. Just a little bit about me so you know who you're talking to. That's my face. My name is Emily Komisar. I am the communications manager for Donorly, and my background is specifically in theater management and producing. I'm also a playwright, but in an administrative capacity, I worked with Theater Forward, formerly known as National Corporate Theater Fund, New York Theater Workshop, and MCC Theater. And I'm also the former managing director of a really small theater company called Lone Star that was a Fractured Atlas fiscally sponsored company. So I've definitely been in your shoes before, trying to figure out how to find donors when you're just starting as an individual artist or as a very small organization. So hopefully I can help you figure out how to apply some of the lessons from this conversation to the work you're doing, regardless of the scale. Before we begin and jump into the meat of our discussion about individual prospecting, I just want to take a moment to make sure that everyone has the same baseline understanding of some of the terminology that I'm going to be using tonight. Some of it, as you know, in many industries, terminology is very, very specific. And if you don't know, you can get lost. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is prospecting, a term that is so important, in fact, that it is in the title of this webinar. Donor prospecting at its very core, whether we're talking about individuals, foundations, corporations, or government agencies, is the act of identifying and then making a plan to engage a prospective donor for your organization or for your work as an individual artist. So prospecting includes, I like to think of it as a four-stage process, although certainly there are lots of nuances to each of these stages. The first one is identifying people who might be willing and able to make a donation to you to support your work. Literally, that means figuring out who those people are and making a list of them. Then the next stage is conducting research on those people, trying to learn as much as you can about them. Then step 3 is determining whether anyone at your organization has a relationship already with any of those people that you could tap into, you can leverage to help in your solicitation process. And then finally, the last stage of the process is determining the most effective way to approach these people in terms of developing a relationship that ultimately leads to you asking for money. So the second set of terms I want to talk about is cultivation and stewardship, or donor cultivation and donor stewardship. Donor cultivation is the process of engaging prospective donors with the end goal of soliciting a gift or otherwise starting a new funding relationship. And donor stewardship, it refers to the ongoing work that you're doing in order to keep a donor engaged with you so that they continue to give and hopefully in the future make increased gifts to your work. Now, sometimes I tend to use the word cultivate to refer to a relationship with a donor that I am trying to move to a higher tier to make the donor want to give a larger gift or maybe a different kind of gift. So sometimes we tend to use these terms a little bit interchangeably, and you'll see both of them come up later in the presentation. So some examples of things that cultivation and stewardship include are, for instance, making a phone call to the donor to say thank you for a gift, inviting your donor for coffee or lunch with you, or if you are a member of an organization, your leadership or a member of your board of directors. It also means inviting your donor for a site visit, or your prospective donor for a site visit to an event you're holding, or something similar so they can actually see your work with their own eyes and see the people, get to know the people who are involved. And then finally, it might include something like sending your donor cards or a handwritten note for birthdays, for holidays, or when you become aware of other special occasions. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth a little further on in the presentation. Now, before we dive into the act of identifying your prospects and where you're going to find them, I do want to offer you one word of caution. Today, we're talking about prospecting new individual donors, but many of you probably already have a pool of pre-existing donors, whether it is just a few people or, hundreds, depending on how long you've been around and been doing the work that you're doing. So in the world of fundraising, it is considered universally true that finding new donors is more costly and more time-consuming than retaining your current donors. So finding new donors to expand and diversify your donor pool is very, very important. But as you embark on individual donor prospecting, hopefully after we finish this conversation tonight, make sure that you don't forget about and that you don't neglect your current donors, because they're very important people to continue to hang on to as well. Okay, so identifying those individual donor prospects. Where do you find them? How do you know if they're good prospects? And really, the two questions you have to ask yourself to determine whether a good prospect is whether they are willing to make a gift and whether they're able to make a gift. There are 4 groups of people from whom to draw potential prospects, and I define them based on their closeness to you and their familiarity with your work. Your friends and family, for instance, I lump into one category, and then your fans. Then you have your friends of friends, which I might sometimes refer to as your network's network, to loosen the definition, I suppose. And then you have strangers, which I realize sounds very daunting, but we will get to that, and I believe in you that you can totally tackle the group of strangers. So if you're new to fundraising to support your own work, your friends and family are the low-hanging fruit in terms of prospective donors, if they're not already your current donors. They're the people, obviously, who know you and your work the best, and they are the people you already know the most about in return. So depending on where you are in your career as an artist, as I said, these people might already be your primary donor base. Then you have your fans, the people who know you and attend your work, and they are the next logical place to look. The fact that they have spent money or time or both to see and support your art means that they take an interest already in what you're doing, and they may even want to make a donation if you take the time to ask them in the right way. So the category of friends can also mean colleagues of friends, acquaintances of friends, family of friends. You get the picture. This is why I sometimes also use the term your network's network. Your family and friends are not only good potential donors, as we discussed a few slides back, they are also great potential advocates for you and your work. You should work with your inner circle to identify who they might know and whom they would be comfortable introducing to you and to your work. Now, this does not have to mean that your friends and family are going out and asking their friends and family for money themselves, although depending on who they are, they may be game for that, and kudos to you, that's awesome. Instead, what you need to do is use your network to help you cultivate these donor prospects that are in their networks. So that means your friends and family should be bringing people to your events, your performances, your shows. They should be sharing your music or your art with people in their networks. And they should also be finding ways to introduce these people to you personally so that you can start to develop a personal relationship with that prospect yourself. Okay. So the last and the biggest group that we need to talk about in terms of your pool of potential prospects is your strangers. I will tell you that in order to be a successful fundraiser in any capacity, you have to be prepared to meet new people and you have to be prepared to put yourself out there. Identifying the appropriate prospects from the strangers group will take more work and more time and should probably not be your first priority when you're starting out. However, ignoring this group entirely could lead to some really incredible missed opportunities with people you just haven't met yet. How do I meet people? It's a great question. I ask myself this question all the time. I have two ideas for you in terms of how to begin tackling the strangers group, making the strangers not strangers to you anymore. The first one is networking events. The arts, as I'm sure you know, have lots of really great built-in opportunities for networking, such as openings, exhibits, shows, conferences, happy hours, etc., etc. They're a really great low barrier entry point for meeting new people in the industry you might not have met before. And certainly these people could become great contacts for you and great advocates for you as you endeavor to identify good prospective individual donors to support your work. But if you get the chance to attend a few traditional networking events, the ones that are super awkward where you wear this name tag that says, hello, my name is, I encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. You will be more likely to meet people at those kinds of events with skills and assets that are far different from your own. And they may also be more financially able to make donations to your organization than peers you may meet who are also in the arts. The second suggestion that I have is the online apps. It turns out that swipe apps are not just for dating anymore, although I will tell you, and you may already know this yourself, that donor prospecting in many ways is exactly like dating. There are a few apps out there that I'm going to introduce you to. They're all relatively new to market, so I can't tell you definitively that they will guarantee you success in anything, but it can't hurt to try. They're all free. Basically, they involve exactly the same thing that you would do when setting up a dating swipe app. You create a profile, you upload a photo, you add a few keywords about the kind of work you do and the interests you have, and then you make some kind of statement about why you're on the app, what you're looking for. You're looking for networking, or you're looking for new job opportunities, or you might be looking for board memberships, things like that. And then you swipe left or right, and if there's a match, the app will put you in touch with one another and you can connect professionally. So Alignable is one of the first ones out there. Then there's an app called Shaper, which I have used, and it's really pretty straightforward. And then finally, Bumble has gotten into the networking business, which I could not believe when I saw the ad on the subway for the first time, but clearly this is a market that's growing. When you're using the apps, one thing that I recommend is don't think strictly in terms of money, in terms of can I get money out of these people. You should also think in terms of what services your potential new contacts can provide to you. So for example, do you need legal advice? Do you need financial guidance? Do you need someone who knows everything there is to know about city permitting? Probably you do, and I'm sure there are people on these apps who can provide those kinds of resources for you. You may even, if you're lucky, find someone who's looking to add pro bono projects to their portfolio, or someone who's looking for, as I mentioned earlier, board membership opportunities. And if you're in a position where you're looking to build a board of directors or an advisory board, this is a great way to start connecting initially with some of those people as well. And I will say asking yourselves these questions is really important when you're at a networking event also, right? Don't look at people as strictly potential money givers, but what other kinds of resources might they have that would benefit you? So one thing that I will say, and we're going to come back to this over and over again, is that donor cultivation is about creating authentic relationships. This is true when you're meeting strangers through networking events or in any of the swipe apps I just showed you, just as much as it is true about your friends and family, your fans, and your network's network. Your first move when you're developing a relationship with a potential donor, in fact, should not be to ask them for money. It should be to get to know them as a person. There's really no formula for this, of course, because every person is different and every relationship is going to be different. If you think of individual donor prospecting as starting new and enriching relationships, this is all going to start to feel a lot less daunting. The key is to make sure that you come to understand what interests your potential donor, what motivates your potential donor, and why they want to talk to you about your artistic work in the first place. They're not going to have a conversation with you unless there's something that piques their interest. And so if you make them feel valued, like you care that they're having a conversation with you, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the response. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, once you've identified your list of potential prospects, is making the ask. When you are ready to make the ask, you need to consider three very, very important questions. When, how, and how much. So the question of when means a couple of things. For one, it means, have I cultivated this donor to the point that they are ready to be asked for a gift? Do they feel like they know me? Are they engaged with me enough that they would say yes when I ask them for money? But then it also very literally means, when does the ask need to be made? What date? What time? What day? You know, what kind of appointment are you going to make to do this? How is this going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're figuring out how to answer the question of when, you really need to consider two important things. When are people most likely to give? And also, when do you need the money? When do you need the cash, more specifically? In terms of when people are most likely to give, definitely consider end-of-year giving, running an end-of-year giving campaign. Something like 30% of all individual donations are made in the month of December every year because people are preparing for the end of the tax year. They're thinking about itemizing their charitable deductions, and they're preparing to be asked. And so this is a great time for you to think about what is the message you're trying to send to any of your prospective donors, or what is the conversation you're having around November and December. The other thing to keep in mind is, based on your knowledge of the individual prospect, which hopefully you have gained through the cultivation process, you need to be sensitive to their needs. So as an example, if you are cultivating a potential donor and you learn that they have a son or daughter who's getting married next month and they're paying for the wedding, then now is a really bad time to ask them for money, right? It's better to wait until after the wedding has happened and they are not writing checks left and right all over the place. All of this stuff, I'm sure, will be intuitive in the moment, but it's good to think about in terms of your planning for fundraising throughout the year. Another option to consider, and this sort of falls into the category of year-end as well, is Giving Tuesday. For those of you who aren't familiar, Giving Tuesday is a campaign that was launched, like 3 or 4 years ago, I think, and it's designed to be social media-based giving on the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So you have Cyber Monday, and then you have Giving Tuesday. Because this has become such a high-profile thing, donors and anyone is prepared to receive lots of messages on social media and through email about giving on Giving Tuesday. And so it's really an opportunity for you to be a part of that conversation. So the next tip I have in terms of answering the question of when is to give your donors hard deadlines. Hard deadlines are really, really great motivators, especially for people who know they want to make a gift but are just kind of waiting to get around to writing you a check or running their credit card through your website or through Fractured Atlas's website, if you are fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas. It gives them, a very specific to-do list, for example. And if you're running a crowdfunding campaign, you may have been on the crowdfunding webinar with Courtney as well. Make sure that you're using, again, a very hard, specific fundraising deadline to motivate your donors, and using that deadline as part of the ask and the reminder. Okay, so this last part is not about your donors, it's about you. And when you're cultivating your donors, obviously the theme will come up that it's really all about them, it's not about you. But sometimes it has to be about you. If you know that you're going to have a moment in your programming year that you absolutely need the cash, for instance, if you are putting on a production, a show, or an exhibit, and you need to be able to pay artists, you need to be able to buy materials, and you know you need to have the cash on hand for that, that's something that you have to be really honest about in considering when you need to be making asks of your donors. And I find that if you've done a good job of cultivating those relationships with your individual prospects, and you can be really honest with them and say, look, I appreciate X, Y, and Z about the relationship we've developed, but I have to tell you that, I need to raise $10,000 by June 15th in order to do this, this, and this. But people are really responsive to that. It's really about, as I said, developing authentic relationships and making sure that these are ongoing conversations and open conversations you're having with your donors or your donor prospects. Okay, so the next question you have to consider is how. And this question refers to the channel that you're going to use to make your ask. And there are lots and lots of different ways to do this. You could send letters or emails for those people for whom it is easier to just get something in writing, whether it's a quick reminder to renew an annual gift or a brand new request. You could make phone calls, or you could do an in-person ask, inviting someone to lunch or coffee, or even, inviting them on a site visit or to an event. And, the lunch and coffee in-person requests are really more frequent when you're asking for a significantly larger gift. But depending on who your donor is and how what you know about them and how they respond to you, it's not an outlandish or inappropriate request to make the ask in person. Considering all of these options, you should also be keeping in mind who should be the person doing the asking. If you are a one-person shop, then it may be that person has to be you by default. But if you belong to a small organization or a mid-sized organization, there may be a number of different people within your group who might be the right person to do the asking. And it really depends on how you believe the potential donor is going to respond to that person. Okay, now finally the question of how much. This question is obviously self-explanatory. How much money are you going to ask them for? Or alternatively, will you be asking them to sort of give what they can or what they feel comfortable with? That's a decision you're going to have to make, again, based on what you know about your donor. In order to answer the question, you really need to consider two things that I mentioned earlier. How much is your donor able to give, and how much is your donor willing to give? For your family and close friends, you may already know the answer to this question, but for other prospects who are further out from your inner circle, you may need to do some research or have an open conversation with them about it. Research might yield information about their giving history and what their inclinations are in terms of their philanthropy, and that could guide your request. Or as I said, open conversations are always a really, really great way to approach, a personal, individualized relationship with a donor prospect. Now, remember that being able to give and being willing to give are two very separate things, and you may encounter someone who is able to give significant gifts, but may have preference for causes that are just not what you do, and they may not be willing to give very much to your work just based on what their own affinities are. All right, stewarding your donors. This was part 3. Receiving your gift from a donor, or from a new donor, I should say, is not the end of the process, and it does not mean you get to relax because your work has only just begun. Now you have to take the time to make your donor feel valued, appreciated, and engaged. I think it cannot be said enough. If you make your donor feel like an ATM, you have failed at stewardship. So the most important thing you need to do after you receive a donation is to thank your donor. You can send the thank you note right after the gift is made, or make a phone call, or send an email. This may sometimes involve listing their name publicly, whether it's on social media or on your website. Just note that in order for the donor to claim a tax deduction for their donation, there will also need to be at some point a formal acknowledgement that verifies the amount of the gift and the date of the gift. And I know this is something that Fractured Atlas can help with. And the most important thing is do this quickly. Depending on the gift, it may be important to thank your donor right away. And so when the gift comes in, you can make a phone call or send a quick email, or depending on your relationship with the donor, send a text, which will be followed up with that formal acknowledgement. So the next thing you need to do is make sure you're staying in touch with your donors, getting to know them as people, making sure they feel engaged with you and the work that you're doing. It's really important to make sure that you have interactions with your donors that aren't about asking for money. So a few ideas for ways that you could do that are sending cards for birthdays or other occasions, or even sympathy cards when it's appropriate if you know someone and their family has passed away or they've been sick. Making phone calls for birthdays. Birthdays are kind of a theme, or they're a very easy go-to. Or call them to hear what they thought of your latest performance or show or exhibit. You could send an email to share some good news about your work or your organization that you know will be of interest to them. And also make sure that you're inviting them to events, and at those events, making sure you get some face time with them to make them feel really valued. Okay, we're gonna stop for questions in just a moment, but I do wanna take just a second to tell you about how Donorly can help as you're navigating the process of individual donor prospecting. So as I mentioned at the top, we are a full-service consulting firm, and we have a foundation in donor research. We do all kinds of consulting around development and fundraising, and the one thing we insist upon in all of our client relationships is that donor research be a fundamental part of our engagement with any nonprofit or fiscally sponsored organization. So for many of our clients, we also serve as an outsourcing of their donor research, which is done on a subscription basis for a monthly fee, but we also do things like interim staffing, assist with planning and executing campaigns. It really just sort of depends on the size of the organization or the group and what their needs are in terms of fundraising. Obviously, with the end goal, as you can see, of empowering nonprofits to fundraise beyond their size. As a quick aside, I want to explain what donor research is for those who aren't familiar. Donor research is the act of searching publicly available records on selected individuals in order to get a sense of who they are as a person, what networks they move in, who else they might know, et cetera, et cetera. It can also help you ascertain their capacity for charitable giving and their history of charitable giving. And through that, it will also give you information about what their affinities are in terms of their charitable giving, what organizations and what causes, or what types of artists do they prefer to give to. And again, this is all publicly available information. It's incredible what the government allows us to see and access if we make the time and effort to actually dig through it. So you can visit our website for more information, which includes a blog with lots of articles with tips, tricks, and advice targeted specifically at small and mid-sized nonprofit organizations. That's the URL is right there, Donorly.com. And don't just stay in touch with your donors, you can stay in touch with me too. My name is Emily Commissar. My email address is up on the slide there, and I would be happy to, well, we're gonna talk now, but if you have any further questions after the webinar, or you are interested in learning more about Donorly's services, I am more than happy to chat. Email me at any time at that address. So now we're gonna take some questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emily. That was just a really great presentation to give us an overview on what individual donor prospecting is like and some of the tools we can use. For everyone on the call, again, feel free to chat your questions either in the chat box or using the Q&A box, also available on the screen. We did have one question so far.
Yeah.
About the we did have some questions far about, like, how do you find a potential donor's donation history, which is a bit about what you were talking about.
Yeah.
I know I definitely have some things to contribute, but Emily, I want you to take it, and then I will throw a little bit of additional information.
Sure. So there's like the expensive way to do this and the cheap way to do this. And the expensive way to do it is to subscribe to databases like Donor Search, iWave. There are a number out there that you can subscribe to that catalog information, publicly available information. Well, all donations are publicly available information, because what happens is a nonprofit organization will publish an annual report with a list of donors, and that list of donors will have ranges attached to it. So it really depends on the organization, but the range could be like $0 to $500. At that smaller, the range can be like, $0 to $10,000. And so when you pull information on a person's giving history, you'll pull, and it'll pull like a list, but it'll give you the ranges unless the exact value of their gift has been specified. The thing that I like to do for theater is look at playbills when I go to other theater companies, because all of their donors are always listed in their playbills. So that's like the cheap version. Or if there's an organization that's similar to your organization, or someone that does work that's similar to the work you do as an artist, see if you can get that organization's annual report, because that will have a list of donors on it. And if you see names that pop up, over and over again, you'll get a sense of who those people are and roughly what range they give in.
No, that's an excellent resource. I also want to offer, just to even take it one step kind of sooner, is a lot of times if you're building a relationship with these donors, you can also talk to them about where they like to give, what are the types of causes they like to support. If you want to, if you're building a relationship and you're trying to understand who they are as people, talking to them about what their giving looks like is helpful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is zero replacement for having like an open, honest conversation with a prospective donor. If you have access to being able to pull names from databases, it can help you determine if you have like a long list of names that you're working with, so you don't have to sit down and have coffee with everyone. It can help you determine, sort of like weed out that list, who are your potentially most valuable prospects and who are maybe the ones who might become a subscriber or something, but are unlikely to give a gift.
Perfect. We do have some additional questions.
Great.
Can you give us a little bit more information about some of Donor.ly's services? And we do have a follow-up question with that is, does Donor.ly work directly with Fractured Atlas, or is it an independent organization?
Yes, so more about Donor.ly's services. Donor.ly is a fairly young company, and I will say that, as I mentioned earlier, the one thing that is really, really inherent to all of the work that we do is donor research. But when I'm sorry, this is sort of a non-answer, because it really honestly depends on the client and what the need of the client is. With some of our clients, we have done things like feasibility studies for campaigns, for capital campaigns or growth expansion campaigns, things like that, and then helped be a part of running those campaigns. We have helped provide interim staffing if there is a moment in a client's or in an organization's lifetime that they suddenly find themselves down a development director. We do some grant writing. I've done some grant writing for some of our clients. So I really honestly, the skills that we have on our team luckily are wide and varied in terms of fundraising. And so there's a lot we can tailor to the specific needs of the organization. And I'm sorry, remind me the second question?
The second part of the question was, does Donor.ly work directly with Fractured Atlas, or is it an independent organization?
Oh, we are an independent organization, but we have collaborated with Fractured Atlas in the past.
Thank you so much. Our next question is there a website that has donor information or donor history that one does not need to subscribe to?
That is a good question that I do not know the answer to off the top of my head, but I could check in with my senior researcher and find out.
I do know that political donations are public information. I'm not entirely sure where that information lives. I also know that 990s can show, which are the tax forms for nonprofit organizations. 990s can also show large contributors, and they have to list the money that they've given to. So if they're a funding organization or if they're a granting organization, you can see the types of organizations they have previously funded.
Yeah, I love 990s.
990s can be great as far as reading tax forms go. And so you have to, that is a bit of deeper dive research, but that information is publicly available for free. Next question is, can you get donations from large organizations as opposed to individuals? And do they have something similar to grants available to nonprofits? I'm going to take this one really quickly because I want to, one, get a little bit of clarity and make sure I am addressing it correctly. So if, as a person who's answered that question, if you want to add some clarity in the chat box, I'd appreciate it. But fiscally sponsored projects are welcome to get donations from any source that needs to provide donations to a 501c3. There are some limitations on the types of things that can be given, but we don't really have limitations on who can do the giving. Spoiler alert, next month we actually are going to be having a different webinar with Donorly about corporate prospecting and research. So that can maybe provide, if there are organizations that can support your project, we can offer you a few more resources about that, but that will be next month's webinar in partnership with Donorly. Does that answer your question? If you can let me know in the chat box, I would greatly appreciate it. We'll move on briefly and then we'll come back to, does Donorly work with organizations if they're an LLC or corporation that is under fiscal sponsorship?
Yes, we'll work with anyone. We also develop partnerships with other organizations that provide services to nonprofit organizations. So yeah, we're a small team, we're a very agile team, and we'll work with anyone as long as they're good to work with, you know.
Certainly, thank you so much, Emily. The clarifying question is if there's a specific site to visit for corporate donations. There isn't. I will say, and again, Emily, I'm sure you can back me up or offer resources, but there isn't one place, there isn't a consolidated location just to find donors or grants or corporate sponsors. The Foundation Center is probably the best bet to find foundations that could be available for granting, but even then you have to be able to identify how your project fits with their funding strategies or with their funding priorities. Doing the research and building a relationship is in fact something you have to do in every aspect of fundraising. Either it's building a relationship with a funder or building a relationship with a corporate donor or building a relationship with individuals. So there's not going to be a site that says these are the people who are available to offer support to you. It's about going out, meeting new people, and like Emily said, bringing the strangers into your network.
Yeah, and I will say and honestly, I do this hand to God professionally for some of the companies that I work with that are in the theater. I look at the donor list in Playbills, and I'm sure that there are sort of equivalent lists and postings in the art forms outside of dance and music and fine art and whatnot, because honestly, especially if you're looking at corporations or foundations, those are the corporations and foundations that are giving to that kind of work, and there's not a whole lot of corporate support for the arts right now, unfortunately. The only other thing I would add, if you're looking at Foundation Center, is that unfortunately there are a number of foundations that will not make grants to fiscally sponsored organizations. They will only give money to organizations that have their own 501c3 status.
And yeah, that is easily determined through research. And we've had some projects, some foundations that said that they didn't give to fiscally sponsored projects once they saw our track record, and once the project developed a relationship with them, we're able to provide some flexibility. So it's helpful to connect with a funder, even if that funder isn't a foundation or an institution. The next question is, can you give a sense of what the going rate might be to get a grant writer if there's a range? I would strongly suggest either reaching out to Donorly or looking on a website like Upwork, which has freelancers, just to see what the going rate might be in your area. It may also depend on the type of grant you're looking to apply for. Like, government grants are far more complicated and therefore far more expensive. Local grants that are LOIs, letters of inquiry or letters of interest, can be much smaller. And it may also be helpful, if you're a fiscally sponsored project, to know that we are happy to review grants. So if there's a conversation you want to have about a grant that you've written that you want some feedback on, that is also something we can provide to fiscally sponsored projects free of charge. We don't write grants for you, but we can provide some feedback and give you some ways to strengthen a current grant application.
Yeah, and I will also say that the hourly rate or the per project rate for not necessarily a firm like ours, but for a freelance grant writer will also depend upon how many years of experience that person has.
Definitely.
But honestly, I think, and this is a little bit off topic, I guess, but the better that person knows, if you talk about your organization, that's sometimes more valuable than how many grants they've written in the past.
Definitely, that's very good advice. Okay, this is a definitely a Fractured Atlas specific question, but what the donate button on a Facebook page, and it is our Fractured Atlas fiscally sponsored products able to use it, and are we working to have that button? So the short answer is, on whether or not it's useful or useless to have a to have a donate button on a Facebook page really depends on how active your Facebook page is. If you're getting a lot of traffic and you have a lot of engagement on your Facebook page, then it can be very helpful. Currently, fiscally sponsored projects are not allowed to receive donations directly through Facebook because Facebook requires that you are your own 501c3. Additionally, if we did allow that, you would actually be charged twice. You'd be charged Facebook's and their credit card processors fees and the Fractured Atlas credit card processor fees. However, there is a blog post on blog.fracturedatlas.org that talks about a way that you can direct the donate button on your Facebook page to your Fractured Atlas fiscal sponsorship page, so that people can be on Facebook, see the donate page, and then be directed to the proper space to be able to give donations to your organization through Fractured Atlas.
The other thing that I will say about Facebook is that they are clearly doing some experimenting with philanthropy through their platform. For those of you who didn't see this year for Giving Tuesday, they ran a matching campaign. They had a certain amount of money to give away, starting at like 8 a.m. or whenever it was that they launched it on Giving Tuesday. You know, the first X number of dollars that came in through Facebook donations was matched by a funder that Facebook was working with. So I would expect that we will see something like that in the future, and that they'll probably continue to sort of play around in this kind of work as well.
All right, I feel like we've gotten to every question so far. I can give it just a few more seconds, see if anybody else has anything they would like to add. If not, you can always reach out to us at Fractured Atlas via support@fracturedatlas.org. There is a good point made that foundationcenter.org is available for free with many public libraries. That is true. And that's a great resource to be able to find institutional funders. So yes, you can email us at support@fracturedatlas.org. If you have any other questions. Also, we will be mailing out, or via email, sending out a video recording of this webinar. And Emily provided her contact information as well, so feel free to reach out to her if you have other questions. We at Fractured Atlas do these webinars. We try to do them fairly regularly, generally on Tuesday evenings. And like I said, next month Donerly will be joining us again for a corporate prospecting webinar, which I'm super excited about. Emily, can you hit the next slide for me just to show
yes.
the list?
Sorry, I forgot I was running it.
Not a problem at all. So these are the list of our regularly programmed Fractured Atlas webinars. You can find previously recorded versions of our webinars at the link at the bottom. And you can also find information for our upcoming sessions at fracturedatlas.org. We're always happy to answer questions. We thank you all so much for joining us. Oh, I see there is one more question, which I can take. Are there any keywords or phrases one should include in a letter to donors asking for donations? And that's a good question. One of the simplest things is the keywords are what is important to your work, like what is the impact of your work. You also want to make sure that there's a direct call to action, specifically that you are asking for donations. Emily, do you have any feedback around a keywords or phrases one should include in a letter to donors?
I just think, as I reiterated a few times throughout the presentation, making it personal is really important. You can't always do that. And when if you're doing a mass email for a year-end campaign or Giving Tuesday or something like that, obviously you can't do that because who has that kind of time? But in cases where you can't do that, I think, as Courtney said, make it about your work, make it about the things that you know are exciting to your donors about what you're doing, and make it, emotional where possible. Include photos or, videos or, things that remind people why it is they're so interested in the work that you're doing.
And yeah, thank you all so much for spending your time with us, Emily. I really appreciate this. Is such great content, and I'm excited that you all got to witness it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us for this webinar. Again, feel free to check out our other webinars in this series. And if you have other questions, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to continue these conversations. Enjoy your evenings.